Okay, so first, hello, Alaura.
Hello, Ilana.
Welcome to being the guest on Humans of AI.
This is weird, but that's cool.
So, first question for you is how did you end up in the AI space? What are you doing here?
This is a lot of backstory. So, in terms of how I ended up writer was a client for a content marketing agency that I used to work for called Animals. And at the time, I was a just content marketing person who was there to assigned to the writer account. And I was like, oh, this means I get to write about writing. And I love that type of meta stuff. And I'm passionate about analyzing what makes a good story. And May, our CEO, and I just were very much on the same wavelength. And as my career at Animals grew and I became the content team lead, writer started expanding their focus and I kept, coming back to different strategies. And so it was time for me to make my next step in my career. I actually asked May for a recommendation for another AI company that I was applying to, nothing to do with writer per se. And she was like, well, I could give you a recommendation, or I could just hire you. And I was like, that'll work. So I came on board. And at the time, Writer was positioned in the market as a writing assistant and very focused on the marketing leader persona as kind of the inroads because that's where all the experimentation was happening at enterprise companies. I mean, there was the vision of becoming an enterprise platform, like the land and expand type of strategy. But really, the main people that were open to AI were people like me who were like, sure, I need to scale my content production. Let's give this a try. Okay, so that was at the end of 2022. And as I was in discussions with May and the rest of the team about coming aboard with Writer, ChatGPT became a household word and it just exploded onto the scene and everything changed and it really did feel like overnight. And so I went from, okay, I'm going to be focusing on building out this community building strategy with marketing leaders exclusively, and eventually we'll move to other teams down the road to no, no, no. We are now going to be addressing the fact that this is the only platform equipped for full enterprise expansion. Regardless of your team, we've already got the tooling ready for any team to start embracing generative AI technology. So I was an early adopter of generative AI by necessity because my client was a generative AI company, and I was at first very kind of my eye. There was a little bit of an eye roll there, right? Couldn't possibly keep up with human writing to now becoming a passionate power user of generative AI. I could not do my job without it. The experiments and the innovation that's coming out of our product team, that they're sharing these looms and everything of different use cases they're coming up with, just mind blowing. And it's not about a threat anymore as a writer. It's very much about enablement, about making these very complex and cumbersome processes intuitive and just kind of a second brain or just kind of an extension of yourself, so you can bring your brilliance to your work and have the AI just kind of be where the rubber hits the road on implementing those ideas.
Throughout this whole first season, a theme that has come up a lot is this tension around like the ethics of AI and how to create responsible AI, how to keep the humanity within AI as we're growing. And one of the main concerns is that as we are building AI, it could be scaling up these systemic injustices that we already see rather than helping us to solve some of these problems. So we have a few clips related to that we're going to listen to and then get some thoughts from Alaura.
So I think what often happens with companies, right? You not only want to just do a rogue check of like counting keywords in a job description versus keywords in a resume. It seems very basic. So I think a lot of companies feel like, okay, let's figure out why the 50 accountants that we have now, why are they successful here? Like what is on their resume that makes them different? So maybe you give an AI tool the resumes of the 50 accountants that currently are in the job. So you give that to the tool, and the tool sort of figures out, does an analysis of the keyword, which keywords are statistically significant. Statistically, if you have this word on your resume, that implies that you will be successful at this company. So one of the resume screeners, employment lawyer Ken Wilner, had found out that the word baseball meant that somebody will be successful in the job, and they got more points for the word baseball on their resume. But if they had the word softball on their resume, folks got fewer points. So obviously that in the US context is probably related to gender, right? Like more men watch and play baseball and women traditionally play softball. These jobs had nothing to do with sports. It's just basically a random keyword that was found on a resume, but I guess on enough resumes that it was statistically significant. So in this case, it was a correlation, right? Us humans trying to connect meaning to any of these findings, right? Like we always feel like, oh, well, it must be meaningful because the computer found it.
I strongly disagree with people who think that technology is on this endless march forward. It zigs and it zags. People have a really, really hard time predicting the future. And the reason, in my opinion, is because we are what determines the future. It's what we do today or don't do today. It's how we come together. It's how we create laws. It's how we think about this. It's how we collaborate. That's how the future happens. It's about our involvement and it's about human agencies. What I always find fascinating is that technology is moving at such an accelerated pace, yet our ability to understand its social impacts come together about norms of behavior, about legal aspects that we need to kind of set in motion, that's moving painfully slow. Everything comes down to the fact that the gulf between the speed of innovation and the slowness of our consideration, that delta is far too large.
The hallmark of machine learning is that the models are unexplainable. I know some people don't like the term black box, so I'll switch to unexplainable, but I feel like it can be confusing to start out by not saying black box. When you have a system that's so complex that it's unexplainable, no one can know if it's been altered. So if a system is so complex that no one understands how it works, it's hard to know if it's been altered. If a system is so complex that no one knows how it works and it's causing problems, say it has some non-discrimination issue or it has some data privacy issue. Well, if it's so complex that no one understands how it works, you kind of have to go back to the drawing board. You can't fix it because nobody understands it. The biggest way to step back is to say, it's just harder to manage risk in systems we don't understand. And so I would just say, right there, step one, we're already off the path.
So first we heard from Hilke, who is talking about this idea of causation versus correlation, in particular around hiring, but it kind of shows up in lots of different places. It's this idea of prejudices or biases that we've had kind of being amplified rather than being questioned. And then we hear from David, who was talking about how much power we have in the future of humanity, in the future of AI. And it's not kind of this like certainty that it will bring us a better future, but that we have to be in charge of the direction that we go in. And then Patrick, who is talking about this magical, mysterious black box model and how it's important and it's our responsibility to understand how AI works. Humans created it. We should be able to understand how it works. So all of these conversations that were really focused on grappling with AI, the future of AI, the ethics around AI, how has that made you think maybe differently about your work within AI, or has it brought up other questions?
So, for me personally, honestly, it validates a lot of the way that I think about the systems of the world in general and how bias and injustices are kind of baked into certain systems, and AI and these language models and how they're trained is just encapsulating that and putting it, like, actually showing a tangible example. This is stuff that we've been talking about for decades and decades, right? But here we have it literally in a box that we can say, here, if you're questioning this idea of systemic bias and systemic prejudice, allow us to show you how this happens. If anything, it makes me a little bit more cynical. I know I don't want to put cynicism or a flavor of pessimism into this, because our show is Humans of AI, and looking at all of these amazing innovation and possibilities when people put their imaginations to something. But it also makes me recognize that certain people, even when given evidence of these patterns, will choose to look away, will choose to chase the bigger promise of profit, for example, or the bigger promise of power at the cost of others. And that makes me sad, and kind of, especially this year when we're about to go into a whole big election again. And we just went through a pandemic where people were given all kinds of evidence and they still chose to look away. So that pattern of people choosing to look the other way is one that I'm familiar with. And I think that the challenge of our time will be to get people to not look away, right? To make them not want to look away. Is there a promise of something other than these two, the profit and the power? What other things can we promise people? It has to do with alignment with their values too, right? We have to make sure that, especially this next generation coming up, that they're coming into the AI workplace, and AI can be a great reducer of burnout and help amplify or build up the value of human created work. But in terms of taking a look at how these ethics are approached, I do have to say these early adopters of AI are very careful. It's not just about covering the bases, it's about making very thoughtful, intentional choices of the human impact of this technology.
We're now going to listen to a couple clips on empowerment in AI, kind of taking a more optimistic, hopeful look into the future of what is possible using AI.
To me, as a strategic leader of any large organization, we need to look at how can we help our employees upskill, reskill, understand how these new technologies will help and aid them in the work that they do. And then also help them transition. If certain jobs are a little bit more manual and repetitive, they're probably going to transition out. But the humans have the domain expertise. The humans have the subject matter expertise. So leverage that, help upskill, reskill them, and you'll be better off as an organization. Again, it gives you a competitive advantage. It gives you an advantage over developing the new products and services, and brings your communities up again. So to me, it's a win-win if you can help transition right, if you can help and put a focused effort around this.
AI has so much potential, and we see it already being used in terms of the aiding diagnosis of conditions. I mean, we see it in terms of the MRI images and the mammograms, the X-rays, etc., that are taken, and can AI be used to help to identify breast cancer or lung cancer, or looking at the pap smears and using AI to detect cervical cancers, things like that. There's also the scientific piece of it as well. So the new treatments that are coming and that are available, AI being used to sort of look for new indications associated with existing drugs, but having new indications that could be relevant for different conditions and things like that. And AI being used for that, and sort of trying to match existing drugs to rare diseases as well, because interestingly, there's a higher percentage of people, of women with rare diseases than there are men. There just seems to be a higher prevalence within the female community. So that's a sort of element around it as well. I'm also starting to see, because obviously we have this data gap now, 30 years we're missing data from the clinical trials that have been conducted. What do we do to address that? So I'm starting to see some really great examples of using AI to create synthetic data sets, for example, and things like that, which could hopefully expedite or close some of that gap.
All right. So do you have any just initial reactions to listening to these two clips again?
Yeah, actually, as I was listening, especially to Joanna's piece about closing that data gap with AI, it made me reflect also on those ethical considerations and embedded bias in AI, right? Because that's what's kind of cool. I said before how you can like package it all up in a box and say, here you go, here's evidence of these systemic biases. And in the same breath, you can literally turn a dial, right? You can make those you can solve for those biases in a way that you can't do in that real world. You don't have to convince AI that it's biased. It will believe you the first time you tell it. Right? And you can say, okay, let's close this. Let's solve for this bias by replacing this biased data with less biased data, with more objective data, and see what the outcomes are when we do that. And that makes me feel very hopeful, because that is, again, this kind of microcosm of how we can also translate that to the real world. We take historic misinformation, for example. It's not about revisionist history. It's about removing that lens of bias, giving the facts. I see those that analogous concept with working with large language models and applying them in all of these industries. The conversation with Joanna was very real and impacted me in a very personal way. I am a neurodivergent woman. I was late diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 40s. And that's because historically, all of the evaluation models for neurodivergent conditions like ADHD and autism were with white boys, white children, male children, right? And so I went through a lifetime of coming up against systems that were not created for me, to support me. And finally getting that evaluation and that diagnosis was incredibly empowering for me, because now I know, okay, what I thought was, I was lazy. It wasn't laziness, it was executive dysfunction. And here are ways to manage it. The more that we have, specifically in healthcare, ways of offering unbiased studies, the more empowering it will be for people like me.
When you talk about neurodivergency, I'm really interested in how it interacts with AI. Is AI like a tool that innately works, or you have to make work for you, or what has that experience been like for you?
I mean, this is perfectly aligned with that theme of empowerment. And again, I should put out there that you talk with one person who's autistic or one person with ADHD, you've talked to one person with ADHD. This is my experience. I cannot speak for the entire neurodivergent community. That said, I've been officially diagnosed with ADHD. I also am in the process of getting evaluated for autism. With ADHD, for example, it's really hard to stick to a routine, like really hard, no matter how hard I try. And so it's important for me to document processes so that way I have a list or something I can refer to know what to do next. Because if you don't understand what to do step by step, you get stuck. And that's part of the reason why it's hard to do a routine. So I find, again, being able to use a tool, not a chatbot, again, I'm using a different interface, is just like embedding that original prompt into this process. So that way it makes it much more repeatable and easy. And all I have to do is say, oh, I just have this tool right here that will help me create that brief, for example, or map out that timeline. It helps me organize my thoughts in a repeatable, routine way. And there's also this phenomenon known as the curb cut phenomenon. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's very much related to the disability rights community, right? So once you have an accessibility accommodation for one person, like for example, the curb cut at an intersection, and that was created for people who use wheelchairs, all of a sudden all sorts of people are going to find empowerment that way. So at that curb, now we have people with, they're just doing their shopping, they're walking their shopping home, they've got those little carts, or you've got mothers with babies and parents with babies with their strollers. All kinds of people can cross the street now. And I think it's the same idea with AI and these type of tools that are like innately, out of necessity, I'm leaning towards this is how I'm using it to help offset my cognitive limitations. And I can hand that tool to somebody who is neurotypical, and they will find value in it as well. That's just one example. Another example is cognitive drain. There's this thing called spoon theory, where a lot of people who are neurodivergent or who have invisible disabilities and visible disabilities have just less energy to work with throughout the day-to-day than able-bodied and neurotypical people. And so that also often leads to brain fog, and I'm a writer. I have to know what word to come up with. And when I get to that brain fog zone at a certain point of the day, I'm at a loss for words, right? And so it's a lot easier for me to turn to my chat interface and say, what are some words for this? Or draft up a first draft of this idea, right? Here's my idea, but I can't put it into words because I'm dealing with my brain fog, right? And that maintains my productivity. It means that I'm able to deliver on the very ambitious timescales that we have to do. I'm leading the way. It helps me as a person with a disability maintain a leadership role, which there's a reason why there's a leadership gap for people like me, because we sometimes diverge from that typical path because the systems are not in place to accommodate some of our needs.
Those are such amazing examples of AI being used for empowerment. And I feel like the curb cut one feels very similar to what Needy was talking about how if you're like reskilling, upskilling for like one person or a small group of people, how it has a ripple effect, how it's improving communities, it's improving like professions, it's improving economies, and it just is so much broader and deeper than imagined. Can you speak on that?
There was one example from that episode that still sticks with me, and that's how they used AI to fast track the application process for refugees. And that, first of all, I believe that they were yes, they were empowering that nonprofit, but they were also giving work to people that were refugees to use those tools to do that. And obviously that's going to fast track. People aren't stuck in refugee camps. They're finding their next home. They're finding that path to freedom and safety that they're looking for their children. And also it maps back to the story of May from that first episode. Her family were refugees. And she's obviously showing the world what can happen when you give people a chance, when you give them the safety and stability of the opportunity of a country that isn't oppressing your family. So yes, that ripple effect is profound. And it's a beautiful through line to show, gosh, the next May could be in that refugee camp that is getting fast tracked toward placement because of an AI tool.
I love that. And the whole time you were just talking, I kept thinking about dignity and how I feel like this is the way that AI can help empower people to gain or hold on to their own dignity. Before I started working on this podcast, I would have never put those two words together.
That's the key right there. We are at a crossroads as a culture. Choose your own adventure. What path are we going to take? I mean, we have people who are literally saying there's an existential threat here, and we can choose that path if we continue to feed that monster, or we can choose the people first path. And that doesn't have to be at the cost of the AI industry. It doesn't have to be at the cost of innovation. That's the false choice, the false duality. If you have human-centered innovation, the outcomes are so much more profound than if you're just innovating for innovation's sake, just because you can. The air of competition and hype around the just because you can crew is toxic, and it perpetuates those biases that we're worried about. But if you use human-centered innovation as that core value, it will lead to that promise. It will lead to that dignity. You have to decide what path you want to go on as an enterprise leader, as a leader of an AI company, as somebody like me who is amplifying messaging for an AI company. I hope that it's clear what path we want to be on from this program, and will continue to go on with this program.
So what other stories do you think need to be told in this space? What are you excited about for, future Humans of AI episodes?
I think in the next season, I really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of people like me who are power users of AI, and how they're seeing their careers change, how their view of the world and future vision is changing as a result of their day-to-day interactions with AI. I really want to see some more of that. I also really want to talk with folks that are in this realm of teaching these models, right? Folks that are learning. I have to imagine that when you are spending your career translating human thought into algorithms, that you have to have some profound things to say about the way that people think and learn, right? So I would love to hear from folks that are in machine learning and AI data science. So actually, this would be a call out. If you are leading AI innovation at your organization, if you are in the weeds of developing AI models, and if you are, like me, an early adopter and power user of generative AI at a point where you're making it scale, you're not just a personal user of AI, but you're working with the team to make it scale, I would love to hear from you. And I would love to have some conversations and see how this is changing your view of the world and what path you want to take